I have everything set up. Let's call today's Board of Trustees meeting to order at 4 p.m. Trudy, if you could please call the roll. Sorry for doing this the second you walked away.
Bukowski,
Present.
Epic, McNamee, here, Nunley,
Here.
Eastmo, Sheets,
Here.
Stanger,
Here.
Swanson,
Here.
Zibble.
Here.
Thank you. If we could please stand for the pledge. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yes, I saw that.
Mr. Zibble, would you please read the mission statement?
Certainly. Laketran is committed to providing quality public transportation services to all Lake County residents with special emphasis on meeting the transportation needs of seniors and people with disabilities.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
Are there any public comments in the room today? Seeing none? At this time, is there a motion to approve the Laketran Board of Trustees Board Meeting Minutes of February 27th, 2023?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Swanson. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Stenger. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
McNamee, Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets,
Yes.
Stanger,
Yes.
Swanson,
Yes.
Zibble.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. We have approved the meeting minutes. At this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Lisa for the January 2023 financial statements.
Okay, so this is our first month for January 2023. We're at about $2.8 million in revenue and about almost 1.7 million in expenses. There's nothing that is out of the ordinary at all for this year-to-date budget versus expense. The only thing I'm gonna just highlight is on the revenue for 2022 compared to 2023. Again, that was the final of the pandemic grants. That's why that is a little bit higher. And if we can go to the next page, and you can clearly see that under federal and state at the top for revenue, we had $1.1 million versus approximately around the $300,000 mark. And that's really the only difference in this particular for the increase in or actually the higher revenue for 2022 versus 23. So we're almost like right on target with our budget. We're a little bit over by 1.6%. For the expenses, we're very similar. We're about 1.7 million for actual for 2022 versus 23. We budgeted to be around 2 million. It is January. Things, just are a little bit slower starting off at the beginning of the year. So there's nothing out of the ordinary. We're about 17% less than what we budgeted so far this year. And probably the majority of that's going to be in the wages and the benefit piece. So we could go to the next slide. This will just give you a glimpse of our cash balance. I kind of added one section on there, and that will be the capital 2024 to 27. So the operating piece, the first piece, the 7.9 million, almost $8 million. That's the piece, that's the 5 months that we're supposed to keep set aside for our operating. The capital, the 2023 and prior, that is our local obligation for the grants that we've committed to at about 7.6 million. And then the 24 through 27, the 2.7 million is our obligations. And those are mainly buses, as you can see on the detail that's in your packet for the capital. That's our local commitment. The cash balance is at 35 then, and then your STS piece, that's the amount that's in the STS checking account for a total of 54.1 million.
So then is it a fair statement that the first three categories, operating capital and capital, that's committed dollars?
Yes,
So those one, there's no, that those dollars are committed and spent for all intents and purposes.
for the, yeah, they'd kind of be in a government encumbered, somewhat encumbered and set aside. Because we would have to, when we apply for grants, and Andra could speak to that more than me, we have to make our commitment for our local cash to be able to get those grants.
Sure.
So, and that is what that piece is. I just thought, since it's on the capital, putting it here would kind of give a little bit of a better picture. So I just added that.
Okay, so the bottom two categories, that's not committed to anything at this
That's
point.
correct.
Okay, thank you.
You're very welcome. Okay. if there's
I'm,
no-
let me interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
I'm a little uncomfortable with this presentation.
Okay.
Uh, Wouldn't it be more accurate, or I believe it would be more accurate, more understandable if we saw the committed funds as negatives? I mean, this gives you the impression that we have $54 million sitting in the bank. I mean, that's the way I interpret it.
Right. And we technically do.
Right. Okay. So we do, but coming off of that is 7.6 and 2.7. So wouldn't you have an opening balance of $54 million and then deduct out the commitments? That's what it's worth. That's what you do in industry.
Okay. So this piece here is just supposed to just show the cash as of today in January. How we want to do the presentation, I mean, that I can certainly adjust that if that's what the board would like. This is how we have it. So like if somebody called me up and said, what's your cash? This is what our cash is, but we do have commitments. And that's mainly, we are accrual based. So I thought that would be important to put that in there. Because you have cash basis and then you have accrual basis. So this basically is the cash basis, even though we report accrual. And what you're talking about is the accrual, where you would subtract that piece out, if I'm understanding correctly. So, I mean, from an accrual standpoint, we could do that. Because it'd be like taking your accounts receivables and your accounts pay, your cash plus your accounts receivables minus your accounts payables. But and I think maybe part of the issue too, on the 24 and 27, even though we've made that commitment, it will be like a long term before we spend that cash. But you know what I mean? Because we're going to spend it in 24, 25, 26, 27. It's more longer term. I think it's a preference on how you want to see it. And like I said, it's not a big deal. I can adjust it, but this is just kind of the pieces and the parts that are making up our liquid cash as of today. If you were to ask me, that's what it is, but we do have a commitment for it. But it may be in the capital 2023 and prior, it might be, I might spend it tomorrow. It might take me 2 years to spend that, our local commitment.
And I understand everything you just said, but I find that the way it's presented confusing.
Okay.
Maybe nobody else does.
This is basically a report that was created by, for a couple board members a while ago. So this is more of a, how do you want to see it report? So if the board would like to see it a different way, we can easily change it because it exists like this today because of previous preferences. So
Sure. Okay. So let me ask you another question then. If you started with the 54 million and you said, okay, we're going to deduct off the 7.6 and the 2.7,
Mhm.
does any of that come back in grant?
Well,
Do
this
we
is
get any
just,
reimbursement on that?
no, that's our local portion. So there is a commitment larger than that for the federal piece. So like, I'll just give an example. We'll use the construction. So if our local share, and I'm making this up, this isn't the exact numbers. Let's say it's 5 million's our local share. There's probably about 17 million that is the federal grant. And that is not in here because that doesn't affect our cash. When we get ready to pay that bill, we draw that down. We're like a wash with that federal share. It's just our local commitment has to match it because otherwise we can't get the federal money without it.
Okay. Well, I guess
And I'm
have a
happy
different
to,
view of it. So, whatever everybody else is comfortable with is fine with me. I find what I'm looking for is what's our net cash balance, net of
Okay.
all of our, all of our income
sure.
versus or future cash flows that we expect.
Mhm.
And maybe that's too much. But if you're going to deduct the capital requirements, then we should also be seeing what we expect in grants or something. To me, this is just confusing. I don't think it tells me what I want to see, and that is how much cash do we have unencumbered?
Okay. And I
That's
could,
just me.
and that would be taking the 54 million, putting it at the top, subtracting your capital for your short term and your long term. We'll call it that, short term, long term. And then you would end up with the cash balance, but the board a long time ago did a resolution to reserve. So we would never go below that 7.9. And that number will change. It hasn't changed because we've been fairly stagnant in our expenses, but it's supposed to be the equivalent of 5 months of our expenses. So they really should change each year, but due to the pandemic and our expenses going down, it's been pretty consistent. But I do expect maybe closer once we finish the audit. I usually wait for the CAFR to come through and then I look at that to get the best angle for all of our adjustments and that to do the 5 months. I could do that. I have no problem doing it.
Well, you can leave it the way it is, and I'll just have to ask you every month, what does it really mean? Because I'll never
Well-
remember.
Well, it's really the 35 and that's
We'll-
really what the cash is. I mean, 30, well, I guess it's how you want to look at it. It would be the 35 and
Lisa,
the 8 million.
We,
if we just title that available cash, would that help, Gary?
we can also take a stab at a slightly updated report for next month, and we can put them both in the presentation and see if what the preference the board has, because these aren't like a standardized or required report that we have to do. It's really how the board wants to consume the information. So if this is not the best way to do it, we will work on making an adjustment based on the comments.
Well, it may just be me. If
No,
anyone else is comfortable with it, that's fine.
I actually agree. I think I like the approach of starting with the 54 and going backwards. I would like to see it, understand all of that too.
I've been concerned about the way it's showing, because it makes it look like we have a lot more unencumbered cash than we actually do, including the public domain. Perhaps one of the labels there could be committed and uncommitted.
We will work on a updated draft report to bring to the board next month that will, I think I understand what you guys are trying to figure out, and we will present it in a different way. And if the board likes it, great. But if they don't, again, these are not, required by law or anything like that. We can get the information to you however you would prefer. No, it's not a big deal.
And if it's still.
We update this stuff from time to time based on preference. We're happy to do it again.
It's
not-
just it's a communication tool. So
Yeah.
however it communicates with the board to make it good for you, that's what we'll do. Okay, so if we go to the next slide, and this kind of, and the capital piece on the cash slide really comes from this. This is our capital plan as of January. We're in March now, so of course, some of those things may have changed, but it just kind of gives you an idea of what the federal piece is, what the state piece is, and what the local piece is going through for 23, prior to 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. So over that period, you can see about 74.6% of it's federal, 0.4% is state, and 25% is our local share commitment for that period. And then I just kind of noted at the bottom, the headquarters piece, the federal and local share, which is included in the 2023. Yeah, so if there's any questions, one of us can answer them, or we can go on to the STS. And there is more detail in your packet. If you look at the capital, that'll give you more detail on what makes up all those expenses for federal and state and local. For the STS, You can see here, again, 22, just trying to highlight, because that's kind of, we were still seeing some effects of that. The pandemic revenue wise was 2.7 million. You won't see it in the expense side so much because we have fixed costs in our expenses. And the only reason for it being a little bit lower in 23 versus 22 is due to the timing of when we paid the insurance. So, and if we go to the second slide, which is my final slide, you can kind of see that on the expense side under insurance at the bottom, right above total expense, you'll see when we budget it, we spread it out over the 12 months, but we didn't spend it yet. And in 2022, we wound up spending the whole year's worth, the 8,096. So that's the reason for the difference. So we are spending a little bit more and generating more revenue on the STS for January of 2023 when we compare it to 22. So we are definitely saying that we're coming out of that pandemic. So unless you have any questions, this will complete my financial report.
Any questions for Lisa? Seeing none. At this time, is there a motion to approve the January 2023 operating financial statements, cash balance, summary of investments, capital plan update, and STS financial statements subject to audit?
Second.
Motion made by Ms. McNamee, seconded by Mr. Zibble. Trudy, if you can please call the roll.
McNamee. Nunley.
Yes.
Sheets.
Yes.
Stanger.
Yes.
Swanson.
Yes.
Zibble.
Yes.
Thank you very much. At this time, we will now discuss, it looks like Ohio grants.
All right, good evening. Tonight, I will be asking the board to approve resolution 2023-007 to allow Laketran to apply for state grants in state fiscal year 2024. This is a routine thing that we do every year. You can move to the next slide. When we apply for state grants with the Ohio EPA or ODOT, they are looking for, does Laketran have the authority to apply for the grants? And that is what this resolution provides. The state fiscal year begins on July 1st and ends on June 30th. There's a variety of state funding programs that Laketran applies to and for which we are eligible. Some are formula-based and some are competitive across the state with other transportation agencies. What's listed there is the typical yearly funding opportunities, but occasionally new ones pop up, and the resolution does account for that as well. We pursue all grant opportunities for which we are eligible, and we use state funding for a variety of projects, including preventive maintenance, vehicle purchases, pilot projects, planning studies. In the past, we've received money for construction, so we can use state funding for a variety of different things. So this is just a routine annual request that allows Laketran to complete projects and maintain a state of good repair in our fleet and facilities. So my recommendation is approval of the attached resolution. I'm happy to answer any questions.
And there may be another one of these in the future that's required for Geauga. The state just hasn't really told us exactly what they want yet. So, but this covers Laketran and our normal grant process. So we may not have to do another one. We just don't know what ODOT will require.
Thank you. Any questions? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve resolution 2023-007, authorizing the filing of applications with the Ohio Department of Transportation and any and all state agencies for state fiscal year 2024 transportation grants, including but not limited to Ohio Transit Partnership Program, Urban Transit Program, Ohio Elderly and Disabled Fare Assistance Program, Diesel Emission Reduction Grant, the Volkswagen Mitigation Trust Fund, Transportation for Livable Communities Initiative, and any additional grants inuring to the benefit of Laketran and its objectives relative to its mission statement and otherwise.
Move for approval.
Motion made by Mr. Sheets. Is there a second? Seconded by Ms. McNamee. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
McNamee.
Yes.
Nunley.
Yes.
Sheets.
Yes.
Stanger.
Yes.
Swanson.
Yes.
Zibble.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everyone. At this time, it looks like I'm going to turn the meeting over to Matt to discuss employee uniforms.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening, everyone.
Evening.
All right, so in 2021, we came to you, or I came to you about the uniforms. And we provide uniforms for drivers, dispatchers, and road supervisors as far as the operations portion of Laketran goes here. And with the last contract, the vendor proposed a 45% increase, which we did not accept. So what we did was we took that opportunity to kind of go back to the drawing board and say, okay, what is it that we want in a uniform? And one of the big things for us is to have high visibility. When a driver is out of their bus in the early morning, late evening, high visibility is a big thing. And currently with our uniforms, we do not have that. So if you could go to the next slide. We do provide an initial offering for new drivers for uniforms, listed there for part-time and full-time. There's different amounts there. A yearly spring order to replace old garments, and then a fall supplemental order that is a $90 stipend. Yes,
On the first portion, is part-time and full-time transposed? Because wouldn't a full-time employee get more than a part-time?
the full-time employee would get the same amount as the part-time plus the 2.
Oh, so it's an
So it'd
additional
be
2 more.
Correct.
Got
Yes.
it. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Traditionally, most employees start as a part-time employee and then go to a full-time. Next slide, sir. So we issued an RFP on January 5th. 39 vendors were mailed the RFP. We had a pre-proposal meeting on January 25th. Then proposals were due on February 8th. In addition to the documents, we also had the vendors provide us uniform pieces for the evaluation. And the next slide kind of shows the breakdown of how all of the scoring went. And UniFirst ended up having the highest score as well as the lowest price. I'm going to take this time here. The uniforms that we are looking at are quite a bit different than what we have traditionally had. So I have brought a couple of drivers here to kind of show the new uniforms. So Denise is showing there's a button down version of the uniform, and Jake is showing the polo version of the uniform. So basically, there is also a long sleeve version of the uniform. These are not complete because there will be a patch on the right side. It will be light blue with the L. That's the patch that we have currently. Thank you.
Matt,
Yes. Oh, go ahead. Yes.
are they visible? I mean, that
Yep.
part is very reflective part.
Yep.
Yeah, we
Those
just gonna
are
say what makes them high visible, the reflective patches.
Yes, those are the reflectivity on the sides and the arms there.
And I was expecting it to be that bright yellow or the bright
Yeah.
orange. Yeah. No. for
Bright yellow.
reflectiveness.
I think would be, I don't think Julia would like me for that one.
I would agree.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next slide here has what our budget will be for the next 3 years of the contract. So this budget is based on full staffing levels, an allotment for 30 new drivers, and I have a 10% variant or 10% increase in there just for if we have more than 30 drivers in a year, I don't want to not have enough for uniforms for them. And that's all I have. Any questions? I could not hear your question, Donna. I'm sorry.
Was the one over,
185, was that the previous vendor? That you said went up 45%.
Correct. Yes, fully promoted was the previous.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Matt, this is just for the drivers to purchase from an allowance that we give them, or
Correct. Yes. So
it's not, doesn't include the maintenance on that.
correct.
Drivers.
This does not include any maintenance employees.
Okay.
This is for drivers, dispatchers, and road supervisors.
Okay, thanks.
yeah, so for the drivers, we just provide their uniforms. They launder them themselves. For maintenance, there's a laundry service that cleans the uniforms, and that's done currently by Cintas off of state contract.
Oh, okay.
Okay, any other questions for Matt? At this time, is there a motion to approve resolution 2023-008, authorizing the CEO or his designee to enter into and execute an agreement with UniFirst to provide uniforms to Laketran drivers?
So moved.
Motion made by Ms. McNamee. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Stanger. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
McNamee,
Yes.
Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets. Stanger,
Yes.
Swanson,
Yes.
Zibble.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. At this time, I am going to turn the meeting over to Ben to discuss an RFP for a potential strategic plan.
Before I do that, I'm going to take a moment to just make sure you guys know who Denise and Jake are, because I have the opportunity. So Denise is the vice chair of our union, correct? So, hey, I got my opportunity. And then Jake, I also want to tell you, Jake started here as a temp, as a bus cleaner, and he worked his way up to part-time driver, full-time driver, and now he's substitute or full-time road supervisor. So he's, it's always nice to hear, at least to me, the story of the guy that started cleaning the bus and now he's worked his way up the organization. So we appreciate both him and Denise coming in today to show off uniforms. I think Matt asked quite a few people and a lot of people said, I don't want to do that. So we appreciate them, and you're allowed to leave if you want, but you're also welcome to stay. Yeah, thanks. So I want to talk about a strategic plan a little bit. I put an action item on the agenda to approve going out for an RFP if the board would like to do that. I did want to take a second and just give the board what I think are some of the reasons we need a plan. Ultimately, that's a decision for the board to make. I think that when we talk about a strategic plan, we had one that was done by a consultant in 2013-14. I know folks have asked about it. It cost about $300,000. That was a plan that Ray did, as I was an employee at the time and participated in the process. It was a very comprehensive plan that had a lot of community surveying in it that is very expensive. When I think about a strategic plan now, I'm not necessarily thinking about that component. I think that we know the community pretty well. We have a good connection with them. I'm not sure we need to do all that. So would drive down any cost of any plan we thought of. But why I think it's important is we've had a lot of changes in the board since that plan was done. And even since we did sort of the mini plan in 2018 that I kind of presented to the board and the board went along with. For me and my team, I think some of these things are important. Is what does this board define as success? Sitting around this table, what that's different for every board member. So having a sort of coalesced vision of what success is for the agency, I think is an important thing that should be from time to time reviewed and discussed. I think it's important that the board talks about what its interpretation of the mission statement is, because again, with individuals that have changed, I think that our mission statement is relatively clear, but again, it's interpreted slightly differently by every board member. And then what is the current board's vision? I've heard things over time as, well, that might not have been what this board would have done, or in the past, that board had a different opinion than this board. And so I think it's important from time to time for the board to refocus and discuss what it wants as a whole in this moment in time. Does that mean we have to do a traditional strategic plan? No, it does not. How this board wants to accomplish planning is up to this board. What I have on the agenda is thought to be sort of a more traditional strategic plan. We don't have to do that. I think there is some merit to that because we can get a consultant to help walk us through that process and make sure the board feels comfortable with the outcome. We could do an annual planning session where the board has a special meeting annually, or could be a component of the January meeting where we sit and discuss what do we want to accomplish this year. What we've been doing is kind of now evaluating initiatives as they come up. You know, hey, the Geauga Trans is a good example. This came up, we brought it up for discussion for 5-6 months. Ultimately, went forward with it. That's an example of a type of thing where you deal with it when it comes up. And there was also a period of time where annually I put my objectives before the board in January to say, this is what I think we're going to be working on this year, just to let the board know. So strategic planning can be a lot of different things. And there's more options than this. I'm sure there's plenty of more options we could discuss about what we want to do. But I think one of the things that's important right now is we are at an interesting point in time. We had short-term goals that were a result of the levy and whether the levy did or didn't pass. Those are really pretty much behind us. We need to now be focusing on the next 7 to 10 years. Where do we want to go? What do we want to do? How do we want this agency to move? We are probably more in a, we're not adding routes on the street every day like we were when we passed the levy. Right now, we're trying to keep up with dial-a-ride. But there really are some other services that are out there that have been discussed by different people in the community, and different levels of support have been expressed for those services. We all know we need to keep up with dial-a-ride. Has been a struggle recently. We're doing pretty good right now. What the future holds in that, I think, probably merits some discussion. I think post-pandemic, we really need to have a detailed discussion about park and ride and what we think the long-term future of that is, what we want to do with it. I consistently get asked about airport service. I'm sure you guys all heard about the spring break time about Hopkins was saying we're out of parking. Don't come here and expect to find a parking space. Representative Callender has actually been asking me about airport service for 3 years. So there is a need in the community. We don't operate on Sundays. Is that something we want to do? With the current senior folks that are aging, I think same-day dial-a-ride is going to be an important component to them. A lot of them have been used to using their car every day, so having to schedule in advance is not something they like much. And then, late night service. That one gets talked about a little bit less, but it is out there as a topic. And I think, each one of these requires more than a 5-minute, 15-minute discussion. These really require the board to be focused on what they want the future of the agency to be, which is part of why I think a more traditional plan might be better. But obviously, there's no legal requirement or mandatory requirement about how we engage in strategic planning. It's how the board chooses to walk down that path. The schedule that you have in your packet is a draft, can absolutely be changed. Doesn't even have to happen in this particular way. This is the schedule that I put together. This would have my objective when I created this schedule and the scope I sent all of you was for the staff to do a lot of the procurement sort of mumbo jumbo heavy lifting, and then let the board have the final say of who the consultant is. So we would send out the scope based on the board approving that scope. The proposals would be received by us. We would review them, kind of do an initial pass, weed out the ones that weren't any good, give the board the final selection on a couple vendors. It could be 2 or 3, whatever we decide on. The board would physically interview those folks in person at a special meeting in the beginning of June and make their final selection at that time. So we tried to, I want the board to have the final say in who the vendor is, but it's also can be time constrictive. If we get 15 proposals, does the board really want to commit to an hour interview for all 15 of those vendors when we can weed them out for you and focus your time on the high quality vendors? Again, it's a draft, doesn't have to happen that way. I thought it was just good. That's sort of what's on my mind. The board could also say, heck, we're happy with the way things are. We don't really want to do a strategic plan. That is completely up to you guys, and I will sort of stop talking and see what y'all think.
Ben, I know we've been kicking around the idea of a strategic plan here for at least for a year, maybe a couple of years even. I wasn't here when you did the last one, but I know we had that one in 18. That was, I thought was very, very helpful. I thought when you set the goals a couple of times, that was always very helpful too, to kind of get an idea on where we were being headed for the year. So it'd be my thought is that trying to do what you call a traditional strategic plan would be very, very helpful, because as you indicated, that there's probably a number of differences in opinions on what direction we should be going in. And I think that would certainly help us understand everybody's point of view, and also then to come to a consensus on what direction we really wanted to go in. So I would be supportive of going forward with this traditional type strategic plan.
I would also be very supportive of a traditional strategic plan. I have been through most of those that you named of the past. And I really believe that we are at a juncture in time where we have gotten an additional levy. There is an aging population. Commissioners have their thoughts. I think we need a really comprehensive look at what the needs are, what some of the other leadership of the county, what their thoughts are. We need, correlated to that is a deep dive in projections on our finances of the options we're looking at. Not only how do we execute it, but how do we pay for it? Because this levy will go until 2029, correct? And we've got to be able to provide the service that this county is looking for various populations to the best of our ability. And we have to ensure that our finances are available to deal with it. And I think at the juncture we're in, I agree with you, Chuck. I think it would be rather useless for just us to sit around and try to figure out what we're doing, what we think we want, and how this would all fit in. That said, though, you're mentioning of an annual review. I don't remember exactly what your phraseology was, but I think that once we get something, an annual review of the board, of what we're working on, where we're at, and so on, I think that would be very helpful, rather than getting a book, shelving it, and not referencing that as we move forward through it.
Yeah, I think that anytime you do a plan like this, you risk it sitting on the shelf and being an expensive paperweight. And that would need to be something that through the scope and through discussions that plan has sort of action steps or activities or something that prevent that from happening. Because there's not really a good point to doing a plan and then just sticking on a shelf and ignoring it. That's, why bother?
Well, I'm not here, but I've seen that happen. And I think that we're also going to see some changes, and maybe we would be on target for something, or something like the geography would come up that we would want to review in the context of this. So I think that an annual review would be a really good option to include in that.
Yeah, I think I would just add that I also think it's a really good idea. Unlike Chuck and Donna, I'd never been through a process like that. So for me, as a newer board member, I think it could also be valuable as an opportunity to get more, to be able to be a part of leading the organization into the future, into and really getting more of an understanding of where we goes as individuals and collectively as a board want to go, and also the organization. And I think, I think one of you mentioned it, but I was just to add on that, the world is not only is Laketran changing and Lake County changing, but the world is changing. We see that with, the workforce is changing, where people are working, when they're working, what kind of services they want. Like all these things are changing at a rapid rate. So I do think it would definitely behoove us to get out ahead of thinking about what we want to be a part of and how, and what would be the best way to be able to get there. And if that is a strategic planning process, then I would be in support of that. And I like the idea of having a consultant or, a third party as like the facilitator, because I think it cuts out a lot of, if we just sit around and do it, then I feel like it has too much potential of just like spinning our wheels. And we just kind of debate it as a group, but we can't agree and nothing ever gets done. Having that third party allows everyone to be able to maybe be able to speak more candidly, and also to have that outside entity to kind of combine or coalesce, I think was the word you used, all of our opinions into something that can actually be used. So I think it's a great idea.
On the other hand, having lived through a lot of strategic plans, they are not a magic bullet. There's
Right.
nothing that, Ben, that you listed that can't be handled tactically with this board. The idea of spending, what was the last one, $300,000 is mind-boggling to me, because there's nothing in there but tactics. This is not a complicated business from a strategic standpoint. We move people. There's tomorrow, it's not going to change. We're still going to be moving people. There's nothing in here that we can't handle internally. Now, maybe you need somebody to guide you through that. Wouldn't disagree with that at all. I've done a couple of those and they've been helpful, where you get the board to sit down and yell at each other in a controlled manner. That's a helpful kind of thing to do. The idea of a full-blown strategic plan doesn't make a bit of sense to me. If you look at the last plan we did, that we spent $300,000 on, it missed the mark completely. It did not talk about headquarters. It did not talk about electric buses. It suggested moving some routes around. Our management can handle that. They're in touch with that every day. If you go back through the last strategic plan, it's 200 pages long, and about 140 of that was to prove that we needed a new levy. From a strategic standpoint, which is in my mind, a tactical thing, not a strategic thing. If you look at their recommendations, there's really only three. Add more service hours, which we're talking about. And again, management would be able to know that they're getting that feedback. We don't need a 30-mile consultant to come in and tell us that. They suggested Tyler Boulevard. We're doing that. And I think, again, management would have seen that coming. I think you were in touch with that. You didn't need a strategic counselor to tell you, hey, we've got demand there. And the third one, I think, was Tri-Point. Well, I'm not sure where we're at with Tri-Point, but I think people can get to Tri-Point through us if they need to be, so we don't have a formal route there. That's all that was in the strategic plan for $300,000. It's insane. Why would we do that when we can handle this ourselves? 10 years from now, we are still going to be moving people. It doesn't change. Now, is it complicated to run the business? Sure it is. But is it complicated from a strategic standpoint of what business are we in? That's brain dead simple. We move people.
First
Ditto.
of all, the last one, what was the title? community operation planning analysis,
I think,
COPA.
I think Ray called it I think its technical name was comprehensive operational analysis.
I can tell you.
Okay, it wasn't really a
Was,
strategic plan. It had elements of it, but it really was not a comprehensive strategic plan. You're absolutely right, Gary. It was intended to lead into the levy. Now we have a significant budget. We have significant changes coming, as Kim identified, and we have an aging population. And
What changes do we have coming? Please help me with this. In our aging population, look at the demographics. Let me just give you some numbers. So if you take a look at the demographics that come from the census reports, we're actually going to lose about 5,000 people between now and 2030. But our senior population will grow from about 22% in 2010 to about 34% in 2030. If you assume 1 in 4 seniors uses the service, that's a total. The net change is 2,725 riders a year. Take that and divide that into 725,000 riders every year, which is sort of our historic, take the COVID issue out. We do about 725,000. 2,725 additional riders is a rounding error, 0.001. Come on, this is not an issue. We are not going to be overwhelmed by senior problem. Double that number. You don't even get to 1%. You don't even get to half of 1%. These are not big problems. We don't need to spend $300,000 on it.
where did we get the 1 in 4 figure?
Make it 1 in 5. Make it half. The number doesn't change all that much. You're talking a grand total differential between today's service and 2030 projection of 10,000 seniors total in the county. We are not going to be overwhelmed by seniors.
We were overwhelmed in 2019, and it's not so much the number as it is the number of rides they're consuming and where in this 230 square mile county they're going and how we propose to move them there and pay for it.
We buy a couple more buses. How complicated is this? I think we're creating this is a shibboleth that we're arguing about, this overwhelming issue with seniors. It's a shibboleth. It's a pointless argument. The numbers just don't support it.
If I may, I can only speak for myself. I wasn't even referring to the senior issue at all in my comments, Gary. I was referring to more larger issues, like, for example, park and ride. Could there come a point in time where we may not need a version of park and ride or a reduced version of park and ride as the workforce changes and maybe more people are working from home or going less? Airport service, I was thinking more of the larger analysis of those types of issues. Me personally, I was not addressing the senior issue. Those are the types of things I was thinking about when I said we needed to think about the world changing and the way that we do business potentially changing.
I don't disagree with that. My argument is not that there aren't going to be changes. My argument is, our history with, at least based on the last strategic plan, is they missed it completely. And they were supposed experts.
That's an important point.
Nothing that's going to happen overnight that we can't handle on our own.
how do we-
Management is plugged into this stuff. They know where the riders are. They know who the riders are. Let's let them do their job and let's give them the support that they need.
So
I don't think it's more complicated than that.
So what would you propose? Would you propose some kind of annual meeting where we get together with us, we get together with the senior staff and they present to us their vision of where they think things are going, and we have some kind of, for lack of a better word, retreat or some kind of extended conversation where we all come together? Like, I'm just curious what your vision would be.
Most of this is going to develop on a month-to-month basis. We're going to see it coming. And if you want to have an annual review of the board, wonderful. I think that's great. I think we should sit down and maybe have that on an annual basis. But I don't think you're going to see on an annual basis all the problems. These things are going to developed, Tyler Boulevard service didn't just show up on a Wednesday afternoon and say, hey, we got a problem.
Sure.
We saw this coming. I'm sure management saw this coming for years, months, at least months. So changes in this, it's one thing if you're in an IT environment where you can be, if you're not at the leading edge, you can be out of touch and out of business in months because you don't have the best technology. But that's not that's not the world we live in. We live in a pretty stable world here. So if you want to have an annual meeting, fine, I'm all for that. That's if we can open up discussions, wonderful. But I don't see anything else that developed in the last 10 years that didn't develop over a period of time that we couldn't see coming and couldn't discuss and come up with a plan. That's my point. Not that anybody in this room is wrong about their views. My view is nothing changes so fast that
What
we
we'll be
can't deal
doing
with it.
then is being reactive instead of proactive. And I still feel that we need to be proactive in what we're doing here and not take things piecemeal as it comes along. And I will submit again, that was not a real strategic plan. And the people who did it, I did not really like it either. And they're the ones we fired last year. So
That's
we
true.
would not have them back.
Donna, again, I'll just repeat to you, my experience with strategic plans is they are not a magic bullet.
It's a tool. And I feel we need that tool to go forward here appropriately, effectively. We need to find out what the community's thinking. It's not simply about moving people from point A to point B.
Daniela, it looks like you had a comment.
Thanks,
maybe.
yeah. Before, I think listening to everybody else's comments, I had my own thoughts, so it's really not driven by anything we've just heard, but I think that there are unknown, rapidly changing differences that we'll see as they come, and to know that, who could have predicted the pandemic, who could have predicted, just a bunch of the things that we've seen. So that's a bit tough, I think, to bite off of with a full traditional of how many years outlook it might be. I will say I liked the evaluating like the initiatives as they come up, like with Geauga. I think that went fairly well for us. I like how that developed and went around. So I'm not really opposed to that idea as that comes as well. And then I think some of those ideas that were listed there, like especially airport, like I myself am interested in that like version as well. So I think I do kind of agree with Gary in the sense of, I think you guys in management do have a sense of what is going on, and you talk to the community. We've had the community here last month talking about, hey, can you consider this? Can you look at that? I think that's easy to get their feedback potentially to develop what we would like that to look like. So I think, some of the more bottom ends of this is good. I think you guys do have a good position here within, again, the community and how it looks and the good communication with them. And I think, again, management and CEO leadership can bring those objectives of what are the outcries of the city and county and state, and what are we looking at here for the next, so we can adjust to those rapidly changing things that happen in the world per se.
Some of you are talking about sending part of the levy money back. And if this is the direction we're going to go, we need to take a deep dive and look at what this community's needs are. We don't know what the commissioners have in mind for more economic development. We don't know what city managers and mayors, some of the agencies that serve the populations, such as the Council on Aging. These people need to be involved in a way they haven't been before, if at all.
Is there any other discussion? Is there a motion to approve the commencement of the procurement process for a strategic plan for Laketran? Motion made by Ms. McNamee. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Zibble. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
McNamee. Nunley,
No.
Sheets,
No.
Stanger,
No.
Swanson,
No.
Zibble.
Yes.
Okay, at this time, we will not be moving forward with a strategic plan. I will turn the meeting over to Ben for the discussion of a consent agenda.
Can we real quick talk a little bit about, I know we don't want to do a traditional plan, that's absolutely fine, but I do, if we talk about taking, I think it's important to talk about planning. I mean, I think I need a little bit of direction from the board as to, do you like the idea of the evaluate initiatives and I can bring stuff to you? Or is there, it doesn't matter to me which way we go. I just
Go
would
to the
like know
slide where you had your objectives, please.
objectives.
There you go. I think if we had a half a day retreat, I'm making something up. Anyone, please correct me if they don't like the direction I'm going. Where we could discuss these items, management could make recommendations to the board. We could talk through some of these items. I think that would probably be the appropriate, but again, anyone please chime in if they don't like the idea. I think it would be hard to, I guess if you did one a month, you could do it in meetings, but if we tried to do a couple of these in a meeting, it would probably be very lengthy. So I would propose doing a half a day retreat. We haven't done a board retreat in 4 or 5 years. Maybe do like a SWOT analysis. I think there's a lot that we could bite off,
Yeah, sure.
but anyone else, please chime in.
Happy to do whatever the board would like.
Do you envision that there will be a facilitator so we don't just sit here and argue?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
You're gonna win
Well, we're just talking theoretically right now.
For what it's worth, I would argue that a facilitator might be a good idea. I've done that on multiple occasions and it does help keep moving things along.
We have a partnership with Lakeland and, Lakeland, I've had experience using some of their facilitators before. I went to Leadership Lake County with one, and I know she would be very happy to help us out and she would do a great job.
I would say, I think that if we're just talking about services, I'm not sure facilitator would be super beneficial because it's going to be details of which service the board likes. And I don't know if that requires a person to help guide them, but I think if it was this type of conversation, I absolutely think a facilitator would be useful. So I would just say, depending on what we want to achieve in that session.
Yeah, if you're doing something like that or a SWOT analysis, I think a facilitator is helpful. For getting into the nitty gritty of deep data.
Yes.
I don't think it's.
So if we were going to do something like going back to your other slide, we're probably going to need some management data to help us understand.
We would need to explain.
Having managed, the directors involved or something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just dancing.
Right.
Yes, because airport service sounds like a great idea. I know nothing about how that.
Right. What does that mean?
Where
right?
car is gonna get parked,
does
what
that mean?
happens? My flight leaves tomorrow at 6. Who's picking me up?
Right.
Yeah,
These are more technical conversations that we could still have a facilitator, but I don't know how valuable they would be. But for this type of conversation, I would completely agree with the idea of a facilitator. Well, why don't I taking that feedback, why don't I come back next month with some thoughts and a little more outlined plan for everybody, and we can see if we like it. We can always make adjustments or changes. I want to make sure I'm delivering what the board wants for this type of stuff. I don't want to be out there like a rogue agent,
For what it's worth, I will say, I think I feel like it almost lends itself to two separate conversations. I don't know if that's what you're thinking. This seems like a very different conversation than the technical nitty gritty of the other slide. How do we do airport? Do we want, how do we do park and ride? Do we want Sunday? That's a very different conversation than this.
I think what I'll probably do is ask a facilitator, what type of timeline is this type of conversation? Is this a 4-hour half day thing? And if they say that, then maybe we do this part separately. And maybe it is the type of thing that we do one at a time. We have this list, but we work through them individually because it's not like we have the ability to implement all of them immediately anyway. So it would have to involve a little bit of a tiered approach.
Prioritize.
overall. So let me work on some thoughts and that's kind of a schedule and ideas, and I'll bring it back next month.
Ben,
Sure.
I would suggest that any board members maybe could submit to you some thoughts too on what they want to talk about.
Absolutely.
Because otherwise you're taking a shot in the dark as to what
Oh.
somebody's thinking about. So,
Absolutely.
so,
We're going to be operating without any input from the community. This is an transit system.
Well, I think that when we talk about how does the board define success, maybe the board says at that time, we want these pieces of data secured from the community, and we can achieve that through some targeted surveying or some, something that doesn't necessarily cost a bunch of money. We can issue, surveys to the community based on some sort of specific metrics, depending on what the board says, that, like what information they find meaningful to help make those decisions. Sorry, I didn't mean to beat a dead horse or anything. Discussion of a consent agenda. So I hit on this a little bit last month. I spent some time thinking about it more, sent some possible draft agendas to Brian and Chuck and Brandon. And I thought we should talk about it again and see if it's something we want to do. I think Brandon had some concerns that Ohio Revised Code doesn't say you can, it doesn't say you can't. So how do we decide to interpret that? So I just thought I would see how the board felt after hearing it for the first time and wanted to see what it might be. Just a reminder of what it is, from my understanding, intended to do is you put non-controversial items that are in it that are sort of approved in bulk. I think there is some gray area about what type of item is non-controversial or what you can and can't put in there. We use them at OTRIP for some substantial items. Sometimes, we approve the CEO's claims in there, which is a ratification of up to $50,000. So there's a lot of variety. I thought it'd also be good to have Brandon kind of, give us his thoughts, and or if the board just says, hey, we don't want this, then we don't want it. It's also, not a big deal one way or another.
I think I'd like to start by turning it over to Brandon before there's any discussion on the topic.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So consent agendas are rather unique in some ways and rather new. And one of the concerns I brought up, I actually spoke to some of my partners. I guess asked Brian for his thoughts too, with some folks at his firm. Some folks love them, some folks hate them. Quite frankly, there was a recent Supreme Court case, Ames versus Portage County Board of Commissioners, where Portage County was using consent agendas and passing things such as resolutions. And the idea there was Supreme Court said, this is a bit of a problem potentially, because now the public isn't seeing who's voting on a resolution or understanding it or hearing the argument about it, not knowing by virtue of a roll call what everybody did. So that's currently working its way back through the Court of Appeals. So that was one just minor concern that I had. I think oftentimes, I'll give you kind of an example here. For instance, consent agendas are used for minutes, or if you had the example I have is a police chief who provides a monthly report of police activity for police department for the month, as opposed to a department head. He wants approval for a new police cruiser or something different. But those typical reports are approved in a consent agenda. So you've got department reports, minutes and things. Resolutions are probably a little questionable. Some of the critics of consent agendas, one particular quote that I received from another lawyer who's not a fan, says voters don't know how anyone voted. There's no minutes of affirmative action, can be challenged even if legal, and a waste of time and money, and believes it's a lazy way of governing. That's just one opinion. Somebody who was in favor of it said consent agendas are used to approve meeting minutes from prior meetings and department head reports, rather routine. Most of them don't include resolutions and can help move the meeting along and save some time. So the implementation of it, of course, I can get into those details later if that's something the board wants to do. It's something you guys would take action with at any particular meeting and say, yeah, we want to use these going forward. And I could walk you through that process to do that. And then the process of the consent agenda itself, if you elect to go forward with such a manner, any one board member could say at any time they want to remove something from the consent agenda. They want it to be discussed. It could then be discussed immediately after the consent agenda or at any other time during the meeting. For instance, if something on there that somebody had a particular passion about or felt needed some further discussion or some question, it could simply be removed. But in a nutshell, that's kind of consent agendas. They are good and bad, depends who you ask. Supreme Court right now is kind of up in the air on it as it applies to public agencies, and it's kind of working its way back through to see what happens as it's been ended. The only thing I would say to everybody again, and not to beat a dead horse, is I think resolutions in a consent agenda could potentially have a pitfall. We wouldn't want someone coming back and questioning us saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't know what you guys did. You didn't pass this appropriately and you circumvented the public meeting process.
It seems
Very much, Mr. Dines. Based on the discussions I had internally in my office and some conversations with you, I would recommend the board take the most conservative position and not adopt a consent agenda policy. Given the limited scope that Brandon has defined and not recommending putting resolutions in there, I'm not sure there would be that much other than minutes or maybe a financial report. So I would not be in favor of a consent agenda. And if anyone would like to chime in and discuss, I'd love to open the floor now.
No, I'm sorry. I would just like to say, I think it would also be, I would also be uncomfortable doing it until we know the result of this. If it's being remanded, is it being remanded back to the 11th district? I would be uncomfortable voting for, or knowing what until we have the definitive court ruling and how it pertains to public agencies.
And that, Mr. Dines, is the essence of what I was going to say, that perhaps we, if nothing else, this should go on hold until that works its way through, but we know what the result is.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, I think, the whole idea of it is very well intentioned. I think Ben brings it's a great idea and a lot of nonprofits and other boards use it. I think to everybody's point here, what you're understanding is for us as a public agency, we have to be especially mindful and careful of these things. And so the court seems to be a little bit on alert for that. So that's
a good thing.
And then this is obviously something we could do we could revisit at any point in time. So after they issue their ruling, if it's something we wanted to revisit at that point, we certainly could, correct?
Yeah, and this was just intended to be a discussion, not a formal vote
Right.
or anything. So if anyone would like to chime in, now is the best time to do so.
My thought on it, Brian, is that it probably doesn't really fit with what we're trying to accomplish here. Listening to what Mr. Dines has had to say here about the resolutions and all that, and I think if you look at the agendas, there's very little that would go into the overall consent approval anyway on our agenda. So I don't necessarily see 100% reason why you would want to do something like that.
Well, we haven't heard anyone speak out for it, so I think for now we'll probably stick with the course that we're on.
Sure.
Okay, I'll turn the meeting back over to you for the 6-month look ahead
Cool.
and CEO report. We can combine.
So for May, we have the AWT passenger shelter. We've had several meetings with Freedon about a shelter in front of their facility, and they are happy with it. With the designs we've had, CT is working on the permit with the city of Mentor. CT did give us their official engineering estimate, which is not to exceed $120,000. So it's a little bit cheaper than Mentor schools, but still one of our more sort of expensive passenger shelters. When they have heat and sort of the nicer amenities, they get a little bit more expensive. We will have why isn't April in here? Should be April also. Geauga County Transit's budget is also for approval in May. Let me find, I don't know why April's not in my PowerPoint, but April is also a month that has things in it. For April, Tech Engineering will be here to present us with an award they received from the Ohio Engineering Excellence competition for their design work on the transit centers and electric bus infrastructure. Also in April, we'll have the first action item for Geauga County Transit. And I'm sorry, I don't have a PowerPoint for this. This is in your packet too, though. We'll have a revised organizational chart specifically to include Geauga Transit. We have a replacement utility vehicle. This is to replace a 2013 Chevy Impala. It's currently used as a driver relief vehicle. It is past its useful life and is just in kind of rough shape, so it's just time to replace it. This is one of those action items that are sort of different than normal. Usually we identify the specific item and we ask for approval after we've done that. The way the vehicle market is nowadays, we've had to change and say, can we have permission up to this amount? And then we have to find the vehicle because the vendors, they won't hold them for us anymore. We used to be able to say, give us that car, give us a specific price, and then we'll have it approved by the board. The dealerships just won't do that. So this is authority to spend up to $37,500 on a replacement vehicle. So going back to May, we will then have, or going into June, I'm sorry. My slides are all goofed up today. I don't know what's going on. We have approval request for federal grant authority. We have, and that's a routine action item. We'll have the Lake Erie passenger shelters. These got moved from May. This involves 3 shelters at Lake Erie, which will service Lake Erie College and Route 1. So they kind of service 2 sides of the street. And there are 2 bus stops on Lake Erie's campus. So there's 3 total shelters, each one with a heater in it. The total budget we think is between 225, 275. CT has not given us their engineer's estimate yet. So I should have that for you, I hope next month. We then have an approval request to replace dial-a-ride buses. This is to replace 8 of our dial-a-ride buses with the quote standard propane powered bus, with a budget of $1.4 million. We'll have an approval of our PTASP. This is a routine action item to approve our public transit agency safety plan. This one is still relatively routine, but it will include Geauga County Transit. We'll have our Title VI plan, which is our anti-discrimination plan required by the feds. Needs to be updated to include Geauga County Transit. And then our EEO plan is another routine item that also needs to be updated to include Geauga County Transit. And July is our break. Then we have August. So we'll have bus advertising. We go out to bid every 3 to 5 years for our advertising agreement. Traditionally, this is just for Laketran. It will include Geauga now. Right now, Eagle Advertising is our contractor. They have been for a long time. We traditionally don't get very many bids on this project. They are the vendor for Geauga County Transit, but they're not doing as good of a job for Geauga County Transit as they are for us. So bringing them in to a consolidated agreement should result in hopefully better revenue for both of us, because we'll have some cross pollination of both counties, hopefully wanting to advertise on each other's vehicles. Snow plowing is another relatively routine activity we go to bid for every 3 to 5 years. We bid out every location individually. So every site we snow plow has a different vendor can bid on. This will also include Geauga County Transit, but again, it's a separate location, so it's paid for separately. Then in August, we have a request to expand dial-a-ride a little bit, with the first of the minivans we've been working on. You guys have heard me say non-accessible vehicle for a long time now. This will be putting that into practice for real. We've done extensive testing by limiting buses to be non-accessible as a test pilot. We are comfortable with a number of 10 in service, and so this will put that into play. This is should save a lot of money on the vehicle purchasing world. Minivans are quite a bit cheaper. We're budgeting, and this does sound high, about $75,000 per van, and that is not the cost of the actual van itself. The van should be probably $40,000, but because they're expansion vehicles, they have to have. We're not able to transfer equipment from an old bus to a new bus. So there's all the extra things that are required to make a bus go are part of this, along with lettering and the radio and the Ranger and all the things that go in there. You guys have probably heard me talk about Rangers before. A Ranger is the traditional sort of computer that's in a bus. It is a custom built piece of hardware that comes from Trapeze. It has a long lead time. It is very expensive. It's a good product. It's very durable. However, the world has evolved and the use of a tablet is now an option. We would like to, in these buses or in these vans, test out the use of a tablet versus trying to expand and order more Rangers. Rangers are about $2,800 a piece just for the hardware. and there's installation and all those things that come with it, and the licensing. Those are all sort of expensive. So we'd like to try tablets in these vehicles and see how they work. And if they work well, we, instead of replacing the Rangers, which are due in about a year, we'd like to switch to using tablets because they are infinitely cheaper. You know, even if you replace them every couple years, because they're not as durable, you'd have to replace them a lot of times to equal the cost of the Rangers. The Rangers are also, they can be very difficult to manage. When they're working, they work phenomenally and they have very few problems. But sort of when they break, boy Nelly, do they break. So this is a good test bed that we don't have to spend almost $3,000 a vehicle to buy a Ranger for them. We can buy a tablet for, you know, $300-ish. So that's kind of exciting. We'll be one of the first folks in the state, in the country, to run a non-accessible vehicle on Dial-A-Ride. It's taken us a long time to get here. I think it's a really exciting thing that could really be a great way for us to serve the community in a more cost-effective way. You know, the first thing people say, probably to a lot of you, is if you have to run such big buses. And hopefully soon the answer will be not all the time. The question, Gary?
Yeah, Ben, in 25 words or less, tell me about the, if I remember right, in order for us to have gotten the exemption or whatever the right terminology would be for us to use these vans, we have to prove a non-discrimination issue every year?
Yeah, so we have a document called an equivalent service plan, which is a plan required by the Federal Transit Administration to prove that you are not discriminating against folks with mobility needs by having a non-accessible vehicle. So we first finished that in, Andre, at 19 or 20, I think. It's been audited by the feds in our last every 3-year review. So they've seen it, they've approved it, and now we've tested it with traditional buses just categorized as non-accessible. So yes, we do have to have a plan. And I'm sorry, that wasn't less than 25 words.
Fail.
About actually doing this, satisfied if it, is it showing them that you're still moving significant number of people, you don't want to be left behind, do it with ridership numbers, is what I'm at?
Yeah, so we have to do it. First off, we had to have a plan before we could even consider it to say that we wouldn't do it. And the way you do that is you show metrics that essentially it talks about denials and trip refusals, and it makes sure that those are not targeted to a certain population. So one of the key metrics is if you look at denials or refusals, if those are greater in a person with mobility device needs compared to an ambulatory person, you would fail. So ours were the other way around. The denials were higher on the ambulatory side, which shows that our capacity is not limited based on the type of mobility aid the person is using. So it's a pretty extensive report. We did pay an ADA consultant specialist to help us develop it, and we update it every year. But I could give it to, everybody could see it if they wanted to. It's not a small document. This is just Dial-A-Ride.
So next question
Is how, when you did this, does that take into account those who are ADA certified, where they get the ride no matter what?
Yes,
If that enters into it?
yes.
You know what the proportion of our ADA versus our ambulatory people are?
In 2021, it was 10%.
Yeah, so I think it's 10%. 10%. So 10% of our Dial-A-Ride ridership is our ADA certified trips.
Okay.
And so these can be used for both. The plan is written to be able to do it for both. So it was a long road to get here, honestly, but I mean, I think at the end of the day, it will be worth it because of how much cheaper a minivan is to maintain, how much cheaper it is just to buy. Just a minivan is just a cheaper piece of equipment than a bus. You know, it's all under one warranty. It's just, there's a lot of pros. You don't have to do as much training because pretty much everybody can hop in a minivan and drive it. So I think there's a lot of long-term benefit. And, you know, the other thing to keep in mind is when you look at the system as a whole, less than 25% of the people that ride the bus need the wheelchair lift. And so there is a huge population of folks that don't. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have it. But there is a large population of our riders that don't use and never interact with the wheelchair lift. And so I think hopefully this is the first step towards maybe more minivans in the fleet. We just have to be very careful and very cautious, because if we get it wrong, there's, people could get denied service, which we don't want. The last thing we want as an agency is to say, sorry, we can't pick you up today because we don't have a bus with a lift. And that causes a lot of other problems. So we have to be very careful.
Who is the manufacturer of the minivan?
We will go to bid. So I don't know now. It will have to be Buy America certified, which here's the rub about that is that all the American minivans are foreign companies. So it will probably be a Honda or a Toyota, because none of the American companies meet Buy America, which is sort of nuts. For a long time, Honda was the leader in those, but it changes all the time based on what the manufacturers are doing. So we'll have to see when we go to bid if we get somebody that gives it different, but probably going to be a Honda would be my guess.
At one point in time, a lot of systems, especially where they were doing a lot of service delivery within cities, short trips, they were going with minivans that were converted that could accommodate one wheelchair. Is that something that might be considered along the way?
So what Don is talking about is what's called a modified minivan in the industry, where they cut the floor out of the center of a minivan and put in a wheelchair accessible space. Those are very expensive for what they are. They are $75,000 to $80,000 vehicles. They have according to the FTA, their life is 3 years. Now you don't necessarily have to go by what the FTA says, but they test them and they fall apart after 3 years. So they're not, they can be used. There's a lot of problems with them. They can't fit in and out of driveways because of how low to the ground they are. So I think we probably would kind of tend to veer away from them for commercial service. I think for an individual, they're fantastic. But when we have to navigate dozens of different environments that we can't be prepared for or predict, sometimes that they can get into some challenges.
Lines and why they're more suitable to a urban setting.
And for an individual, they're great because you can plan for them, where they're gonna fit and they can work amazingly. Marla, our employee here, has one, she loves it. And they have a very good niche that they are really valuable in. For our service being used for 15 hours a day, they could get beaten up pretty fast.
A ride like
7 years. Well, you'd buy two, so they could be similar, but yeah. Yeah, they make some really great ones, so I don't want to diminish them in any way, but for what we do, they have some challenges. Any other good questions? Anybody else have any questions? All right, then in September, we will have the audit. I expect the auditors will offer the same board meeting conference they have in the past, where you can sign on electronically and hear them talk about it. We just don't have the date yet. And then as of right now, we don't have any items for October, but I'm sure they will materialize. Any questions about any of the 6-month look ahead things? All right. CEO report, I will be quick. Thank you for everybody attending the groundbreaking ceremony. I think that was a great way to kick off the project. They are starting work next week. I think there was a gentleman in the parking lot as you guys arrived here doing some surveying. Julia is working on a website that will have all of the pictures of the project uploaded on a weekly basis. So if you ever have a question about, hey, what happened, there'll be pictures for you to see. I just wanted to make sure the board was aware. One of the things that will be the most challenging in this project is parking. So we are going to lose, the exact number of parking spaces is 94 as part of the process. There are 96 spaces in the remote lot. So we aren't really losing spots, but we are going to have contractors probably park at the Menor Park and Ride the bus here every day, which would be a good experience for them. But the main reason I want to tell the board that is we are going to have guest parking for the board, and we will have spaces for you to park out front of the building when board meetings take place. So you won't have to park in some remote location. For Geauga Transit, We had a kickoff meeting on Monday, March 13th. We had another meeting today. We're working through action items. So we I broke this out into phases. We really have completed phase one. We are in phase two, which is the actual transition preparations. So there are now a total of 5 things that will be before the board for votes as of right now. I went through those all in the 6-month look ahead, but here they are just in another place. And then the official transition date is July 1st. IT strategic plan, they are working through the employee survey process. The survey is aimed to get all the frontline employees to provide their feedback on the frontline IT products they interact with, Trapeze, Dossier, those rangers I talked about. Final plan is due in June. They are still on schedule. For the grant tracker, there is 1 grant on here. There actually should be a second one now. It appeared, I can't say it any other way than out of thin air. For those of you that remember, a couple years ago, we entered into a joint application for a planning study with the city of Willoughby's, Willowick, and Eastlake on Vine Street. So we got a grant from NOACA. Laketran took the lead on that application, and we have not even quite finished a planning study about streetscaping and zoning and all kinds of different comprehensive things on Vine Street. We took the lead because after some feedback from NOACA, they said that was the most effective way for the cities to be awarded grant funds. So of course we want to be a part of that. We submitted our annual, well, actually, we didn't even do it. There's a process that you submit your list of projects in the future to NOACA. And transit projects always require you to apply for money. You get awarded money. So we actually submit an application that we know about that we can include on this grant tracker, and then the grant money shows up. In this case, never having dealt with road money before, we put the list of projects in the tip, and NOACA randomly sent Andrea and I an email that said the Vine Street project had been awarded $1.5 million for construction. So that was a surprise to us. So we got that notification the other day. It's very surprising to me because the plan isn't even finished yet. We have not received the final draft of the plan, and NOACA has already decided it needs 1.5 million in construction. So that's a positive for the cities of Willoughby, Eastlake, and Willowick. So that money will flow through us. It was a very unusual process. I've never gotten an email that said, "Hey, you won money that you didn't apply for." But it will go through us. You'll see it in the books, but it is just a sort of pass through for the cities. Question, Gary.
Yeah, what do you mean by pass through or flow through? We get the funds and then we distribute them to the cities?
Basically.
Based on what criteria?
The cities and us have a meeting to set up that funding percentage. That was part of the planning process that hadn't been finished yet. So in this case, the cart definitely showed up before the horse. It's a very sort of weird process. I'll give you my personal opinion.
The money is also for, I think, fiscal year 2026. So
Yeah.
it is not money that is currently in our possession. 2026.
This is the first time in my career where grant money has shown up that we didn't ask for.
So we have the money now.
It's been
but it's not for
been allocated to
It's
us.
been awarded to us, but it is not in our possession.
Yeah, and it's a reimbursement, so they would have to get spent first, then drawn back down. But I would have preferred to put it in this tracker for the board to see, but not having experience with road money, apparently it comes to you in a different way than the money we're used to getting. So it's a little odd.
Something similar happened with the Captain's Stadium.
Yeah. Last thing I'll go over is service quality and extended service. So ridership and performance have been good. Ridership for February of 23 was about 8.3% above 22. And during that time, denials remained below our historical average. So I'm very happy to say we are pulling out of the sort of service quality problems we had at the end of last year, early this year. I know there's a little dive if you look at the red line for February, but that it's hard to display this on the TV, but that dive is still higher than where it started in February of 22. So a pretty typical trend, and our ridership graph is kind of messy. denials, the great thing is at the very end of that, you see those denials below 200 is really where we look to stay below. And so we have successfully done that for the first couple weeks in the year. And then what wasn't in the packet was a more immediate review of ridership, which is to date, we are within 20 trips on average per day of 2022. So March is tracking very similar to March of 23, which is good. Obviously, I can't give you the full report yet because the month isn't over. But denials have also trended low. Seeing denials down below 200 is really good news. So all of the drivers from our sort of hiring blitz we had that we talked about all those people we hired all at one time are all on the road now. It usually takes them about 6 months to become really efficient. So these numbers should continue to improve, but we're not having that giant flood of people coming in the door like we were. So I think we're in a pretty good spot now because things will only sort of improve as those people get more efficient. And we are, even though March is one of our busiest months and it's staying busy, our denials are remaining low. So it's really important that that correlation, that trips are trending where they need to and denials are staying low, that really is indicative that we are pulling out of sort of that problem area. So it is our plan to start working on expanding service in the May-June timeframe, unless we see a crazy kind of speed bump pop up.
And do we have more hiring planned?
We're going to be hiring to keep up with attrition now in general, but we aren't doing quite as much ramp up as we were. So there'll still be hiring events and hiring of drivers going on, but it's more of a keep even now versus catch up.
So when does the next class, when do you anticipate the next class beginning?
Looking at Matt.
It's probably going to be around May is what I'm seeing.
So that's very good news. Obviously, we're going to continue to monitor it. We'll continue to report it on a monthly basis, but we are really getting out of that sort of in the weeds area we were. And that is it for me. And I will move on to the next.
Okay, thank you very much, Ben. Looks like our next item is committee reports, the Special Projects Committee. Gary, is there an update?
Yeah, a quick one, I guess. We had a meeting last week and it was the consensus of the committee that we pretty much met our mandate, which was to, for lack of a better term, shepherd the building approval or denial process that has obviously been taken care of. And so we're sort of at the point where the Special Projects Committee has sort of felt like they've done what they're supposed to be, what they were charged with doing. And I think basically it's back to the board and our esteemed president to decide whether or not, you know, he wants to appoint another committee to shepherd the building process going forward, or are we comfortable with having CT come in and make, you know, a report to us monthly or however often we think is appropriate, or some other process. But I guess we're kind of at the point where we think we're kind of done with the objective.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who served on the committee. Appreciate it. I guess in the interim, if anyone has any thoughts on if they think a committee would help see the building project through one way or the other, please feel free to send me an email or call me, and I'm happy to have that discussion on what's the proper way to move forward. So thank you very much. Old business. So one item on old business that I have is the rules and regulations. So last month, things were pretty busy with the groundbreaking and whatnot. So I think the best course to move forward, unless someone strongly disagrees, is sometime in April to set a optional work session that if anyone would like to attend to discuss the rules and regulations and to help maybe Brandon get some guidance on how to move forward to draft a document. I would like to entertain anyone's thoughts. This is something that's on my list that I keep rewriting. So I would like to start to see some progress moving forward.
I think I'd support that, getting together, seeing if we can move it forward.
Okay, Anyone else?
I mean, I would agree with you.
Agreed.
I would too.
Okay, so I will work with Ben and Brandon to get some proposed times together to have an optional work session. And if someone has no interest, they don't have to attend. And if someone's very interested, they can attend. Is there any other old business in the room? Seeing none, is there any new business in the room? Also seeing none, at this time, is there a motion to adjourn today's Board of Trustees meeting?
So moved.
Motion made by Ms. Nunley, seconded by Ms. McNamee. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
McNamee,
Yes.
Nunley.
Yes.
Sheets,
Yes.
Stanger,
Yes.
Swanton,
Yes.
Zibble.
Yes.
Okay, thank you, everyone. We have concluded at 5:34, which I believe for Mr. Capel's tenure has been a record meeting.
Can we